Mom texted, "Don't call or come over. We're done." I replied, "Got it." And by midnight, my name is Nova Reed, I'm 30 years old, and I live in Austin, Texas. This is my story. It was a Tuesday night. The kind of quiet, ordinary evening that doesn't warn you when your life is about to be split in two. The before and the after. I was in my small apartment, the city lights of Austin glowing softly through my window. The air smelled like leftover takeout and the lavender-scented candle I had lit on the coffee table. I was sketching a design for a client, lost in the gentle scratch of my pencil on paper. It was peaceful. It was my own. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. The sound was sharp, an unwelcome interruption. I ignored it at first, wanting to finish the line I was drawing. It buzzed again, a short, insistent vibration. I sighed, put my pencil down, and walked over to it. The screen was bright in the dim room. It was a message from Mom. My stomach tightened, a familiar knot of anxiety that always appeared when her name lit up my phone. I tapped the screen. The words were stark and black against the white background. But before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you are watching from. Don't call or come over. We're done. And don't even think about the will, sweetie. I read it once, then twice. My brain struggled to connect the words to my reality. We're done. It was so clean, so absolute, like a surgeon's cut. There had been no big fight, no screaming match, no final dramatic argument. The last time we spoke 2 weeks ago had been tense. But this was an execution. There was no room for questions, no space for an appeal. It was a verdict. The last word, sweetie, was the cruelest part. It was a pat on the head while she was pushing me off a cliff. It was the little twist of the knife, meant to remind me of my place. The sweet, sensitive daughter who should know better than to cause trouble. For a moment, the world went silent. The hum of the refrigerator disappeared. The distant traffic outside my window faded away. It was just me and those words glowing in the dark. I felt my hands start to tremble, a faint tremor that threatened to become a full-blown shake. I took a deep, slow breath, tasting the dust in the air. Crying felt like a waste of energy. Screaming felt pointless. They had already made their decision. So I did the only thing that felt right. The only thing that felt like me. With a strange sense of calm, I typed back 2 words. Got it. My thumb hovered over the send button for a second before I pressed it firmly. The little blue bubble shot across the screen. A confirmation that the message was delivered. A confirmation that the connection was severed. Then, I turned my phone face down on the counter. I didn't want to see her name again. I didn't want to see if she replied with more poison. I walked to the kettle, filled it with water, and set it on the stove to boil. The familiar ritual was grounding. Water, heat, tea. Simple things that made sense in a world that had just stopped making any. As I waited, I looked around my apartment. Every piece of furniture, every book on the shelf, every piece of art on the wall, I had bought it all myself. With my own money, from a life I had built hundreds of miles away from them. I had left home at 19 to escape the suffocating weight of their expectations, and for 11 years I thought I had succeeded. I thought the distance had given me freedom. But I was wrong. I was still tied to them. An invisible financial and emotional lifeline that they held in their hands. A lifeline they had just decided to cut. The kettle whistled. I poured the steaming water over a chamomile tea bag and watched the water slowly turn golden. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, letting the heat seep into my cold fingers. I took a slow sip, the warmth spreading through my chest. I watched the steam twist and disappear in the dark room. For hours, I just sat there. I didn't move. I didn't think about the future. I didn't mourn the past. I just existed in the strange, hollow quiet of the present. I was an island. I was alone. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a fact. Then, just as the clock on my oven ticked over to midnight, the silence was broken. My phone, still face down on the counter, lit up. It vibrated, a long, desperate buzz. A call. I didn't need to look to know who it was. The screen went dark, then lit up again with a new message. Then another call, missed, then a FaceTime request. The notifications started coming one after another, a frantic barrage against the quiet fortress I had built around myself. The silence was over. Their cold, calculated dismissal had failed to get the reaction they wanted. Now the storm had just begun. And this time, I wasn't going to be the one to clean up the damage. To anyone looking from the outside, the Reed family was a Texas postcard. We were the American dream, printed in glossy color and framed with a rustic wooden border. My father, Richard Reed, was the patriarch, a man who had built a small barbecue joint into a statewide chain called Reed's Real BBQ. He was larger than life, with a booming laugh that filled every room and a handshake that felt like a business deal. He loved telling the story of how he started with nothing but a secret family recipe and a whole lot of grit. He saw himself as a self-made king, and our family wasn't a family. It was his kingdom. My mother, Evelyn, was the queen. Her role was to make the kingdom look beautiful. She ran the company's social media accounts, but her real job was curating our family's image. Her Instagram feed was a masterpiece of deception. There were photos of us at family dinners, smiling over a perfectly smoked brisket, with captions full of hashtags. Blessed, family first, Texas life. She would post pictures of Dad and her on date night, clinking wine glasses with a caption about how love takes work. She never posted about the silent, tense car rides home. She never mentioned the arguments that happened behind closed doors, always whispered, because yelling was unladylike. Mom's greatest talent was making a hollow shell look like a solid gold statue. Then there was my brother, Ethan. He was the crown prince, the heir to the barbecue throne. Ethan was 2 years older than me, and from the day he was born, he was the golden child. He had Dad's charm without the work ethic, and Mom's looks without the subtlety. He was the kind of guy who failed upward, always landing on his feet because our parents were there to catch him. He crashed his first car, a brand new Mustang, for his 16th birthday, and Dad just laughed and bought him another one. He flunked out of business school, and Dad just gave him a manager position at the flagship restaurant. Ethan could do no wrong. His mistakes were just learning experiences. My mistakes, however, were character flaws. And me? I was Nova, the spare heir, the creative one. That's the label they gave me when I showed more interest in art supplies than in accounting ledgers. It wasn't a compliment. It was a polite way of calling me impractical, of dismissing my passions as a hobby. When I announced at 18 that I had been accepted into a prestigious design school in Austin, they didn't celebrate. They looked confused, as if I had just told them I was moving to the moon. But what about the business? Dad had asked, his brow furrowed. Who's going to help your brother run things? Ethan doesn't need my help, I'd said. And I don't want to run a restaurant. I want to design spaces. My mother had just smiled that tight plastic smile of hers. It's just a phase, dear. You'll get it out of your system and come back home. But I didn't. Leaving home at 19 wasn't just about going to college. It was an act of survival. Their house was suffocating. The air was thick with unspoken rules and unmet expectations. Their love was transactional. It was something you earned by being useful, by playing your assigned role. Ethan played his role perfectly. He was the charismatic successor. I was supposed to be the sensible, responsible one in the background. The one who would quietly fix his mistakes and make sure the family image never cracked. They said I was too sensitive. I remember one Christmas, I was about 15, and I'd spent weeks hand-painting a portrait of our family home for my parents. I was so proud of it. I gave it to them, my heart pounding with hope. Dad glanced at it for a second and said, "That's nice, honey. You forgot to paint my new truck in the driveway." Then he turned his attention to Ethan, who had gotten him a ridiculously expensive set of golf clubs. My mother hung my painting in the hallway leading to the laundry room. A week later, I saw it had been replaced by a framed magazine article about Dad's restaurants. They said I was too idealistic. What they really meant was that I was too hard to control. I saw the world in terms of feelings and principles. They saw it in terms of profit and loss. When I tried to talk to them about how they treated their employees, Dad would wave his hand dismissively. "That's just the cost of doing business, Nova." When I pointed out that Ethan was taking money from the cash registers, Mom would tell me I needed to be more supportive of my brother. "He's under a lot of pressure," she'd say. So I built my own world in Austin. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through school. I graduated at the top of my class. I started my own small interior design firm from my kitchen table. I was proud of what I had built, but a small, stupid part of me still craved their approval. So I let them back in. I answered their calls. I sent them money when they needed it. I became their unofficial, unpaid financial advisor, their on-call therapist, their secret fixer. I thought that by being useful, I could finally earn their love. I was wrong. I wasn't earning their love. I was just enabling their dysfunction. And the more I gave, the more they took, until there was almost nothing left of me. The beginning of the end started at my parents' dinner table. The table itself was a perfect metaphor for our family. A massive, polished slab of dark oak that looked impressive but was cold and hard to the touch. It was set with Mom's best china, the kind that was only used for holidays or, in this case, a family business meeting. That was Dad's term for it. It meant there was a problem, and the problem was always Ethan. I had driven the 3 hours from Austin that morning, feeling a familiar dread settle in my stomach. The call had been vague. "We need to talk, Nova," Dad had said, his voice laced with a false sense of bonhomie. "Come for dinner. Your mother is making her brisket." It was always a summons, never an invitation. The atmosphere in the house was thick with tension. Mom was fluttering around the kitchen, her movements jerky and anxious. She kept wringing her hands, a habit she had when she was trying to hold her composure. Her pearl necklace seemed to tighten around her throat. Dad was in his study, the door closed, taking a business call, which I knew meant he was avoiding the inevitable confrontation. Ethan was sprawled on the living room sofa, scrolling through his phone, completely unfazed. He looked up when I walked in, gave me a lazy smirk, and went right back to his screen. No hello, no acknowledgement, just the silent assumption that I was there to serve my purpose. We sat down to dinner, and the small talk was excruciating. Mom asked about my work, but her eyes were glassy. She wasn't really listening. She just wanted to fill the silence. Dad finally emerged from his study and took his seat at the head of the table, looking grim. He carved the brisket with aggressive sawing motions. We ate in near silence for 10 minutes, the only sound the clinking of our forks against the expensive plates. Finally, Dad put his fork down with a loud thud. The meeting had officially begun. He slid a thick folder across the table. It stopped right in front of my plate. "Ethan's in a bit of a bind," he started, not even looking at his son. I didn't open the folder. I didn't need to. I already knew the story. It was the same one, just a different chapter. "Which location is it this time?" I asked, my voice flat. "The one in San Antonio," Dad grumbled. "He had some management issues," Ethan scoffed from across the table. "The staff was lazy. They had no respect. The vendors are refusing to deliver because the bills haven't been paid in 3 months." Dad cut in, shooting Ethan a dark look. "And the bank called. The business loan is in default." I finally looked at my brother. He was staring at his plate, a sullen expression on his face. He looked like a teenager being scolded, not a 32-year-old man who had just run a successful business into the ground. Again, this was the 3rd location he had managed, and the 3rd one he had nearly destroyed. Mom's voice was a tremulous whisper. "We can't afford another bailout, Richard. The brand can't take the hit." She looked at me then, her eyes pleading. It was the look she always gave me right before the ask. The look that said, "You're the strong one. You fix this." Dad leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "Nova," he said, his voice shifting into its familiar, authoritative tone. "You're good with money. You've got your own business. You're stable. We need you to cover the loan." I blinked. "Cover it? Dad, that's over $100,000. "It's an investment in the family," he countered smoothly. "Just this once. To get him back on his feet. Family helps family." The words hung in the air, heavy and false. Family helps family. My mind flashed through a rapid fire, slideshow of all the other times. Family helped. Family? There was the $10,000 for Mom's experimental treatments that turned out to be a spa retreat in Arizona. There was the constant paying off of Ethan's credit card debt from his lavish weekends. There was the $50,000 I'd loaned Dad for a new line of commercial smokers, a loan he conveniently referred to as my contribution to the legacy. I had been paying and paying, patching the holes in their sinking ship, hoping that one day they would see me. Not just my bank account. I took a slow breath, feeling a strange calm settle over me. The dread was gone. The anxiety was gone. In its place was a cold, hard clarity. I looked from my father's expectant face, to my mother's nervous expression, to my brother's entitled pout. They weren't asking for my help. They were demanding a payment for a service I had provided my entire life, the service of being their safety net. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the center of the table like a grenade. The silence that followed wasn't just shock. It was profound, fundamental disbelief. It was the sound of their entire world tilting on its axis. The fixer had refused to fix. Mom's carefully constructed smile finally cracked. "Nova, what do you mean, no? This is your brother. This is the family business. It's Dad's business and it's Ethan's debt," I said, my voice steady. "You'd let your brother fail?" she asked, her voice rising with a note of hysteria. I finally met Ethan's gaze across the table. He was glaring at me, his eyes filled with a hatred that was shocking in its intensity. "No," I said, speaking directly to him. "I'd let him learn. That was it." That was the moment something shattered. A coldness entered my father's eyes that I had never seen before. It wasn't anger. It was something worse. It was dismissal. My mother looked at me as if I were a stranger, a monster who had just revealed its true face. The rest of the dinner was a blur of accusations. I was ungrateful. I was selfish. I had forgotten where I came from. I didn't say another word. I just sat there, absorbing their attacks, feeling the emotional armor I never knew I had slid into place. When it was over, I stood up, said a quiet good night, and walked out. No one said goodbye. I drove the 3 hours back to Austin in complete silence, the family I thought I had finally cracking and crumbling in my rearview mirror. The 2 weeks that followed the dinner were a study in silence. A heavy, deliberate silence that was louder than any screaming match could ever be. It was a punishment, and I knew it. In my family, affection and attention were commodities, and they had just put an embargo on mine. There were no phone calls, no passive-aggressive texts. My mother, who usually littered my social media with cloying comments like, "My beautiful, talented daughter," went completely dark. It was as if I had ceased to exist. At first, the silence was unsettling. I'd pick up my phone out of habit, expecting to see a missed call or a message, but there was nothing. The quiet felt like a cold front moving in, a sign of the storm to come. But as the days passed, something shifted inside me. The anxiety began to fade, replaced by a strange and unfamiliar peace. I woke up in the morning without the knot in my stomach. I worked on my designs without the background hum of waiting for the next family crisis to erupt. I was breathing easier. The silence wasn't a punishment. It was a reprieve. I started to see the pattern of my life with them more clearly. It was a cycle of chaos and rescue. Ethan would create a problem, my parents would panic, and I would be called in to solve it. My reward was a temporary return to their good graces, a brief period of warmth before the cycle started all over again. My no at the dinner table hadn't just been a refusal of a loan. It had been a refusal to play my part in the family drama. And without me in my designated role, their whole production had ground to a halt. Then, on the 14th day, the text came. It was a Tuesday night, and I was curled up on my sofa with a cup of tea, feeling content for the first time in a long time. The buzz of my phone was a jolt back to reality. It was Mom. "Don't call or come over. We're done. And don't even think about the will, sweetie." I read the words, and the fragile peace I had built over 2 weeks shattered. But it wasn't sadness I felt. It was a profound, chilling clarity. This wasn't an emotional outburst written in a moment of anger. This was a calculated, strategic move. Each word was chosen with a purpose. We're done. The two most final words in the English language. A door slammed shut and locked from the other side. It was a declaration that my services were no longer required, and therefore neither was I. And don't even think about the will. This was the most revealing part. It laid bare the transactional nature of our entire relationship. They believed the only reason I would ever help them, the only reason I would endure their neglect and Ethan's arrogance, was for a future inheritance. It never occurred to them that a small, foolish part of me was just a daughter who wanted her parents to love her. They saw love as a business deal, and I had just violated the terms of the contract. So, they were voiding it, making it clear that I would get no payout. And that last word, sweetie, it was pure venom, wrapped in a sugary coating. It was designed to diminish me, to put me back in my place as the silly emotional child. It was the verbal equivalent of a pat on the head to a dog that had just been kicked. I thought of all the years I had spent trying to be enough for them. I remembered my college graduation. They had shown up late and left early to take Ethan to a baseball game. "You know how much he loves the Rangers," my mother had whispered to me as they left, as if that explained everything. I remembered the time I was hospitalized with pneumonia, And they didn't visit because it was the same weekend as the annual barbecue festival, a crucial event for the brand. They sent a flower arrangement with a card signed by their assistant. I thought of the thousands of dollars, the hundreds of hours of emotional labor, the endless sleepless nights I had spent worrying about them, cleaning up their messes, protecting their precious image. All of it, in their eyes, was just a down payment on an inheritance I never cared about. The text wasn't an ending. It was a diagnosis. It was the final, undeniable proof of a sickness I had been trying to cure my whole life. And you can't cure people who don't believe they're sick. I set the phone down on the coffee table. I looked at the words one last time. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old pain, the sting of being the unloved child. But then something else rose up to meet it. A wave of pure, unadulterated relief. The fight was over. The endless audition for their affection had been officially canceled. I didn't have to try anymore. I was free. I picked up my phone, my fingers steady. I typed the 2 words that would end one life and begin another. Got it. I pressed send. And I felt the last chain break. The moment I sent my reply, a strange quiet descended, the kind you find in the eye of a hurricane. I knew the storm wasn't over, but for a brief, beautiful moment there was calm. I had acknowledged their terms. I had accepted their decision. In their minds, the transaction was complete. I was officially disowned, and they probably assumed I would now collapse into a puddle of tears, begging for forgiveness. They had always mistaken my kindness for weakness. I went about my evening. I finished my tea. I washed the mug and placed it carefully in the drying rack. I tidied up my living room, folding the blanket on the sofa and arranging the pillows. Each small, normal action was an act of defiance. My world had not ended. My life was not over. I was still here, in my home, a place that was truly mine. It was exactly at midnight that the other side of the storm hit. My phone, which had been silent for 2 weeks, suddenly came to life. The screen lit up with an incoming call from Mom. The vibration was angry, insistent. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. A second later, a notification popped up. A new voicemail. Immediately after, the phone started ringing again. This time it was Dad. I ignored that call too. Then came a barrage of text messages from Ethan. I picked up the phone, my heart beating a steady, rhythmic drum. I didn't feel panic. I felt a detached sort of curiosity. I opened his messages first. What did you do? Mom is crying. I hope you're happy. You think you're so much better than us, don't you? You'll regret this, Nova. The classic guilt trip straight from the family playbook. Blame, shame, and a vague threat. It was so predictable, it was almost boring. I deleted the messages without replying. Next, I listened to the voicemails. Mom was first. Her voice was thick with manufactured tears. Nova, darling, I don't know what you're thinking. You're overreacting. We were just upset. You know how your father gets. Call me back. This is tearing your family apart. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She took no responsibility, framed me as the unstable one, and positioned herself as the victim. Dad's message was short and clipped. Nova, stop this foolishness. You're making your mother ill. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Call us. It wasn't an apology. It was an order. An order from a king whose authority had just been challenged. They didn't understand. Their texts, their calls, their fake concern. It wasn't having the desired effect. They thought their power came from their ability to grant or withhold their love. They had just played their final card, cutting me off, and they expected me to fold. What they never realized was that their true power over me was financial. Not the inheritance they held over my head, but the financial lifelines I had extended to them. And they had just reminded me where all the switches were. With a calm that felt almost foreign, I put my phone down and picked up my laptop. I opened it, the soft glow of the screen illuminating my face. I opened my banking app. It was time to do some accounting. Line by line, I reviewed every financial connection I had to my family. Each one was a thread, and I was about to snip them all. First on the list was Mom's supplemental credit card. It was under my name, an account I had opened for her years ago to cover medical co-pays and prescriptions. I clicked on the statement. Alongside the pharmacy charges were weekly charges from a high-end salon, monthly subscriptions to boutique clothing services, and dinners at expensive restaurants. I remembered her telling me how stressed she was, how her health was so fragile. I felt a cold anger rise in me. It wasn't about the money. It was about the lies. I found the option on the website. Report card is lost or stolen in close account. I clicked it. The system asked if I was sure. I clicked yes. A small green check mark appeared. Done. Next was Dad's business line of credit. I had co-signed it 5 years ago when the bank was threatening to pull their funding. My excellent credit score was the only reason they had secured the loan. It was supposed to be for emergencies only. I pulled up the activity. There were charges for custom-made boots, a weekend golf trip to Pebble Beach, and a down payment on a new luxury truck. His business emergencies. My name was on that loan, my financial future tied to his recklessness. I navigated to the bank's contact page, found the number for the business accounts department, and wrote a clear, formal email instructing them to freeze the account immediately and remove my name as co-signer, effective immediately. I attached a copy of the original agreement where it stated I could do so with written notice. I hit send. Done. Finally, there was Ethan. The temporary loan I had given him of $20,000 to get back on his feet after he lost his last job. There was no formal contract, just a text exchange where he promised to pay me back in 6 months. That was 2 years ago. I opened a new email. This one was to my lawyer. I attached screenshots of the text messages and a record of the bank transfer. My message was simple. Please begin proceedings to formally collect on this personal loan. Done. By 1 a.m., it was all finished. Their lifeline to my bank account, the one they had taken for granted for over a decade, had gone dead. I had not been loud. I had not been emotional. I had been quiet, methodical, and efficient. I had responded to their emotional warfare with cold, hard logistics. I closed my laptop and looked at my phone. It was still flashing with notifications. They were trying to break down a door that was no longer there. For years, I had been the family's emergency contact. Now, for the first time when they dialed my number, all they would get was a deadline. And the silence that followed felt like power. The next morning, the sun rose with an infuriating cheerfulness, casting long, golden stripes across my apartment floor. It was a beautiful day, completely indifferent to the fact that my world had been detonated. My phone had buzzed itself into a low-battery coma overnight. I plugged it in, and as it powered back on, the screen erupted in a chaotic cascade of notifications. It was a digital assault. 37 missed calls, 94 text messages, a dozen voicemails. They had spent the entire night trying to claw their way back into my life. I made coffee, the familiar gurgle of the machine a small anchor in the storm. I promised myself I wouldn't reply. I would read, I would listen, and I would bear witness to their panic, but I would not engage. For years, their chaos had been my responsibility. My role was to absorb their anxiety, to soothe their tempers, to find a solution. Now, for the first time, I was just an observer. I was watching their carefully constructed world begin to tremble, and the ground was shaking because I, the silent foundation, had just stepped away. I started with the texts. They were a perfect timeline of their escalating panic. Mom's first messages from the early hours were confused, almost innocent. Nova, my card was declined at the grocery store. It was so embarrassing. Can you check on it? An hour later, the tone shifted. Why aren't you answering? This isn't funny. By 3 a.m., it was pure weaponized hysteria. You're doing this to hurt me. I can feel my blood pressure rising. After everything I've done for you, sacrificing for you, this is how you repay me? By giving your mother a heart attack? Dad's texts were a different flavor of toxic. His started with command. Call me now. When that didn't work, he moved to threats. I just got a notification from the bank about the business credit line. What did you do, Nova? You have no idea what you're messing with. This is my legacy. The final messages sent just before dawn were laced with a bitter, wounded pride. Your grandfather would be so ashamed of you. You're selfish. You've always been selfish. You think your little design business makes you better than us, but you're nothing without this family. Ethan's were the most predictable. They were a stream of pure, unfiltered rage and entitlement. My lawyer just called me. A lawyer? Are you insane? You can't sue me. We're family. He followed that with a string of insults, calling me a jealous, bitter spinster who was angry that he was the one chosen to carry on the family name. You were always jealous of me. You couldn't stand that Dad trusted me with the business and not you. This is all just payback because you're a failure. It was all there. A textbook portrait of their dysfunction. My mother's martyrdom. My father's tyranny. My brother's narcissism. They weren't angry because they missed me. They were angry because the ATM was broken. They were terrified because the fixer had walked off the job, taking her tools with her. I listened to one of Dad's voicemails. His voice was a low growl, an imitation of calm that barely concealed the fury beneath. "Nova, you have until noon today to reverse what you've done," he said, as if dictating terms to a disobedient employee. "You will call the bank. You will unfreeze the accounts, and you will cancel this ridiculous lawsuit against your brother. Then we can talk about how you're going to make this up to us. This is your only chance to fix this. Fix this." That was always my job. I remembered the time, years ago, when Ethan had racked up a $5,000 gambling debt. My parents were frantic, not because their son had a problem, but because the man he owed money to was a well-known figure in town. The scandal would have been terrible for the brand. I was the one who met the man in a dingy back office and paid him in cash from my savings, money I had been putting away for a down payment on a car. I told my parents it was a car repair bill for Ethan, and they accepted it without question, relieved to have the problem disappear. I remembered the night before Dad was set to present a new expansion plan to his investors. He came to me in a panic, the proposal a complete mess of bad numbers and unrealistic projections. I stayed up all night, drinking black coffee, reworking every single spreadsheet, rewriting the entire presentation. He presented my work as his own and took all the credit when the investors loved it. My contribution was never mentioned. I was the family's ghostwriter, its secret accountant, its invisible crisis manager. I was the glue, as transparent and as strong as it needed to be, holding all the broken pieces together so they could look whole. Now, they were seeing what happened when the glue was gone. They were just a pile of broken pieces. I went to my studio that day. It was my sanctuary, a bright, airy space filled with fabric swatches, paint samples, and blueprints. This was the world I had built for myself, a world of creation and order, a stark contrast to the destruction and chaos I came from. I tried to work, to lose myself in the plans for a new boutique hotel I was designing, but my phone was a constant, buzzing distraction on the corner of my desk. It was a beacon of their panic. Around 11 a.m., I received a new text from a number I didn't recognize. "Nova, this is your Aunt Carol. Your mother called me. She is an absolute wreck. Please, whatever is going on, just call her. She's your mother." They had started deploying their flying monkeys, pulling others into their drama to apply pressure. I felt a pang of the old guilt, the familiar urge to smooth things over, to make the bad feelings go away. But then I looked at the blueprints on my desk. I looked at the name I had chosen for my firm, Nova Studio, my name. My work, my life. I had spent years making myself smaller to fit into their world. I had dimmed my own light so I wouldn't outshine the golden child. I had silenced my own needs to listen to their endless demands. No more. With a steady hand, I picked up the phone. I didn't call them back. I powered it off completely. The screen went black, and the studio was suddenly, blessedly silent. The chaos was still out there, raging away, but for once it couldn't get to me. It wasn't my responsibility anymore. For the first time in my life, I was letting them face the consequences of their own actions. And the silence wasn't empty. It was full of peace. 3 days of silence passed. 3 days of my phone being turned off. It was a detox, a deliberate unplugging from their toxic energy source. I felt lighter, more focused. My work was better, my sleep was deeper. On the 4th day, I turned my phone back on. The predictable flood of notifications came, but they were different now. The frantic anger had been replaced by a cold, strategic silence. Then, a single text from Dad came through. "Cafe Bellini? Tomorrow. 10 a.m. Be there." It wasn't a request. It was a summons. The king was calling a meeting of his broken court. My first instinct was to ignore it, to refuse to be drawn back in. But then I reconsidered. This wasn't about them anymore. This was about me. I needed to face them one last time. Not to fight, not to argue, but to state my truth and close this chapter on my own terms. I wouldn't go there for them. I would go there for me. The next morning, I walked into Cafe Bellini. It was a place we used to go for special occasions when I was a child, a place of happy memories that now felt tainted. I chose a small table in the corner, a position where I could see the door but wasn't the center of attention. I ordered a black tea and waited. They arrived together, a united front of dysfunction. Dad walked in first, His shoulders squared, his jaw set so tight I could see the muscles twitching. He was wearing his important businessman suit, a piece of armor for the battle he intended to win. Mom was behind him, hidden behind a pair of oversized black sunglasses, even though the cafe was dimly lit. She clutched her purse to her chest like a shield. And then came Ethan, trailing behind them, his face a mask of bored arrogance. He was already scrolling on his phone as if this whole affair was a massive inconvenience. They sat down without a word. Mom placed her purse on the table with a soft thud. Dad stared at me, his eyes cold and assessing. Ethan didn't even look up from his phone. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. They were waiting for me to break, to apologize, to start begging. I didn't. I just took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. Finally, Dad spoke. His voice was low and controlled. "We need you back," he said. It wasn't a plea. It was a statement of fact. The vendors for the San Antonio location are pulling their contracts. The bank has put a freeze on all our assets pending a review. A review you triggered, Nova. You can't just walk away from your responsibilities. I met his gaze. The fear I always felt when he used that tone was gone. I didn't walk away, I said, my voice quiet but firm. You pushed me. You sent me a text that said, "We're done." Mom flinched, a barely perceptible movement behind her sunglasses. She finally spoke, her voice trembling with practiced fragility. "We said things we didn't mean. We were hurt. You know how your father gets when he's worried about the business." She reached a hand across the table, her fingers barely brushing my arm before I subtly pulled away. "We're your family, honey. Families fight, but we always find a way back to each other." It was a beautiful speech, one she had probably rehearsed. It was also a complete lie. "You texted, 'We're done,'" I repeated, my voice as steady as a rock. "You threatened me with the will. That wasn't a fight. That was a business decision. You were firing me from the family." Ethan finally looked up from his phone, a sneer twisting his lips. "Oh, give it a rest. Don't act like you're some innocent victim here. You loved being the martyr, holding all your help over our heads. You just want control. You've been waiting for a chance to stick it to us for years. The accusation was so wrong it was almost laughable. For years, I had craved the opposite of control. I had craved acceptance. I wanted to be a daughter, not a tool. I wanted to be a sister, not a safety net. I looked at my brother, at the man-child who had coasted through life on a wave of privilege I had helped pay for. A small, faint smile touched my lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated clarity. "No, Ethan," I said softly. "I don't want control. I just stopped giving it all to you." The truth of that statement hung in the air, a silent bomb that dismantled their entire narrative. They stared at me, their expressions a mixture of shock and fury. They had come here expecting me to be broken, desperate to be let back into the fold. They had their script ready. They would scold me, then magnanimously forgive me, and then things would go back to normal, with me once again funding their lives. They were not prepared for this calm, centered person sitting across from them. They didn't know this Nova. To be fair, I was only just getting to know her myself. Dad recovered first, falling back on his default setting. Anger. "This is ridiculous," he boomed, causing a few people at nearby tables to look over. "You are going to fix this. You will call the bank, you will call your lawyer, and you will stop all of this nonsense today." "No," I said simply. "What do you mean, no?" He sputtered, his face turning a blotchy red. "I mean, no. The accounts will remain closed. The lawsuit will proceed. My name will be removed from your debts. I am done." For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in my father's eyes. He was losing. His power, his control, his intimidation, none of it was working. He was a king without a kingdom, a CEO whose main asset had just liquidated itself. The empire he was so proud of was a house of cards, and I had been the single card holding it all up. My father stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish out of water. He was searching for a new threat, a new angle of attack, but his arsenal was empty. He had already fired his biggest weapon, disinheritance, and it had completely backfired. He had no leverage left. "You'll regret this, Nova," he finally managed to say, his voice a low growl. The threat was hollow, the words of a man who had already lost. I looked at him, at the father I had spent my entire life trying to please, and I felt a strange mix of pity and peace. Maybe, I said, my voice even. But at least my regret will be mine. Not yours. Not Mom's, not Ethan's, mine. That was the key. For 30 years, my life had been dictated by their needs, their dramas, their regrets. Every major decision I made was filtered through the lens of how it would affect them. The college I chose, the jobs I took, the money I saved. It was all tied to my role as the family's designated adult. Taking ownership of my own potential regret was the ultimate act of taking ownership of my own life. I stood up from the table. My legs felt strong and steady. I reached into my purse and pulled out a $20 bill, placing it on the table to cover my tea and then some. It was a small gesture, but it was symbolic. I was paying my own way. The transaction was complete. As I turned to leave, my mother's voice, now stripped of its theatrical tremor, whispered my name. Nova. I stopped but didn't turn around. We're your family, she said, her voice small and desperate. It was her last, pathetic attempt to appeal to a loyalty she herself had broken. I paused for a moment. The sounds of the cafe, the clinking of cups, the low murmur of conversation, fading into the background. I took a breath and spoke over my shoulder. My words clear and precise, not spoken in anger, but as a simple statement of fact. Family doesn't write you off when you stop paying their bills. Then I walked out. I didn't look back. The cool morning air hit my face and it felt like the first breath of a new life. The sound of the cafe door closing behind me was the most freeing sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a prison door clicking shut, with me on the outside. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly comprehend, was that their world was not my world. As I walked away from the cafe, I wasn't walking into a void of regret and loneliness as they imagined. I was walking back to a life that was already full, already successful, already mine. While they had been focused on the slow, rotting decay of their barbecue empire, I had been quietly building my own. My firm, Nova Studio, had started small, just me at my kitchen table with a laptop and a dream. But I had poured all the energy I once spent managing their crises into my work. I channeled all the creativity they had dismissed as a hobby into my designs. And it was working. 2 months before the fateful dinner, I had landed the biggest contract of my career, a multi-year deal to redesign the entire interior of a major boutique hotel chain based in Dallas. It was a massive undertaking, a project that would put my firm on the map. While they were arguing about Ethan's unpaid loans, I was presenting my design concepts to a boardroom full of executives. While they were drafting texts to disown me, I was signing contracts worth more than their entire failing business. I was signing checks with my name, Nova Reed, embossed in shimmering gold leaf. The irony was crushing. They had always called me the idealistic one, the sensitive one, as if I were a fragile bird incapable of surviving in the real world. Yet, I was the only one who had built something real and sustainable. Their success was a legacy, something handed down and squandered. Mine was earned. The next day, I was on site at the first hotel in Dallas. I walked through the gutted lobby, the air thick with the smell of sawdust and fresh paint. I conferred with contractors, made decisive choices about color palettes and lighting fixtures, and felt a thrill of pure, unadulterated joy. This was real. This was mine. All the years of being told my passions were impractical, all the times my work was dismissed, it all faded away in the face of this tangible achievement. I had spent my life trying to fix their broken world. But the real shift happened when I realized my purpose wasn't to fix what was broken, but to build something new, something beautiful, something that was entirely my own. I looked at the blueprints in my hand, the detailed plans for a future I was creating, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would never regret walking out of that cafe. I was no longer a supporting character in their tragic drama. I was the architect of my own life. A year can feel like a lifetime, or it can pass in the blink of an eye. For me, it was both. The days were filled with a dizzying rush of work, travel, and creation. I threw myself into the hotel project, working 16-hour days, not out of obligation, but out of pure passion. The first hotel renovation in Dallas was completed to rave reviews. It was featured in a prominent design magazine, the very same one my mother used to leave artfully placed on her coffee table to impress her friends. There was a 2-page spread with glossy photos of my work and a headline that read, Nova Reed's Vision, the New Face of Texas Luxury. I wondered if she had seen it. From there, Nova Studio exploded. I opened a second office in San Diego to manage a new contract for a coastal resort. I hired a small, dedicated team of talented designers who shared my vision. My life was a whirlwind of site visits, client meetings, and fabric swatches. I was building something, not just a business, but a reputation, a life. The hollow ache that had been a constant companion for so many years was gone, replaced by the satisfying exhaustion of meaningful work. I didn't hear from my family directly. After the confrontation at the cafe, they had gone silent. But news from my old hometown trickled in through the grapevine. I had a distant cousin I exchanged Christmas cards with, and she would occasionally call with updates, her voice dripping with a mixture of gossip and pity. The first domino to fall was the San Antonio restaurant. It folded less than a month after our meeting. The vendors had pulled out, and without my financial backing, Dad couldn't secure another loan. The closure made the local paper. The article mentioned financial mismanagement as the cause. A few months later, the real trouble began. I learned through my cousin that Ethan had been formally charged by the state. It turned out his management issues were more than just unpaid bills. He had been cooking the books for years, embezzling money from the company to fund his lavish lifestyle. The lawsuit I had initiated with my lawyer had been the loose thread that, when pulled, unraveled his entire web of deceit. The bankruptcy proceedings for the business had uncovered years of fraud. That was the blow the Reed's Real BBQ brand could not survive. The story of the golden child being charged with a felony was a stain that no amount of my mother's curated social media posts could wipe away. One by one, the other restaurant locations shut down, the signs taken down in the dead of night. The empire my father had spent his life building, the legacy he had accused me of trying to destroy, had crumbled under the weight of its own corruption. The final, symbolic nail in the coffin came about 10 months after I had walked out of the cafe. My cousin called to tell me that my parents had sold the house. The sprawling ranch house I had grown up in, the stage for all those perfectly false family photos, was gone. They sold it quietly and moved to a small rented condo in a town 2 states away. They had vanished from the Texas social scene they held so dear. They were no longer the Reeds of Reed's BBQ. They were just Richard and Evelyn, a retired couple living in anonymity. I listened to all this news with a strange sense of detachment. There was no joy, no triumphant feeling of, I told you so. There was no satisfaction in their ruin. Gloating would have meant I was still invested in the game, still playing for points. But I had left the stadium a long time ago. Instead, what I felt was a profound and quiet sadness. It was the kind of grief you feel for a death that happened long ago. I was mourning the family I never had. I was mourning the parents they could have been, the brother he might have become. I was mourning the fantasy I had clung to for so many years. The fantasy that one day they would wake up and see me, that they would love me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. Their downfall wasn't a victory for me. It was just the final, ugly proof that the fantasy was truly dead. One evening, I was sitting in my newly finished office in San Diego, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink over the Pacific Ocean. I was flipping through the latest issue of the design magazine, the one with my project on the cover. I looked at the photos of the elegant lobbies and serene suites I had created, spaces designed to make people feel calm, welcome, and cared for. And I realized that's all I had ever wanted from my family. I hadn't destroyed them. They had destroyed themselves. Their greed, their entitlement, their refusal to take responsibility for their own lives, that was the poison that had rotted their kingdom from the inside out. I had just stopped being the antidote. I had just stopped drinking the poison with them. Watching them fall wasn't a celebration. It was simply a confirmation that I had made the right choice. I had chosen to save myself. Tonight, I am sitting in my apartment in Austin. It's a Tuesday, almost 2 years to the day since my old life ended and my new one began. The air is quiet. The city lights flicker outside my window like 1,000 tiny stars brought down to earth. I am brewing a cup of chamomile tea, the same kind I drank that night. The steam rises from the mug, twisting and disappearing in the dim light, but it doesn't feel like a ghost anymore. It just feels like steam. The apartment is different now. The walls are covered in art I've collected from my travels. The shelves are overflowing with books on architecture and design. The cheap furniture from my early, struggling days has been replaced with pieces I designed myself. This space is a reflection of me. It is calm. It is strong. It is peaceful. My phone buzzes on the counter. For a split second, a ghost of the old anxiety flickers in my chest. A reflex, but it's gone as quickly as it came. I walk over and look at the screen. An unknown number. The area code is from Tulsa, the city near the small town they moved to. It could be anyone. A wrong number? A sales call. Or it could be one of them, reaching out from the ruins of their lives, looking for a lifeline. The old Nova would have been paralyzed by that ringing. Her heart would be pounding, her mind racing with a toxic cocktail of hope and fear. She would have answered, unable to resist the pull of that broken connection. But I am not the old Nova. I watch the phone ring, the screen lighting up and going dark, a desperate, silent plea. I don't feel anger. I don't feel hatred. I don't even feel pity. I feel nothing but a quiet, gentle peace. A boundary. I let it ring until it stops, until it goes to voicemail. A voicemail I will never listen to. I pick up my warm mug of tea and walk back to the window, looking out at the glittering city that I now call home. And I finally understand. Peace doesn't come from getting an apology. It doesn't come from them finally understanding the pain they caused. It doesn't come from watching them fail. Peace isn't something they can give you or take away. It comes from freeing yourself. It comes from the moment you stop waiting for them to fix you and you start building your own life. I take a sip of my tea. The warmth spreads through me, a comforting presence in the quiet of the night. And I smile. A real smile. A smile that reaches my eyes. Into the quiet of my apartment. I whisper the two words that started it all, but this time, they mean something completely different. Got it. It's not a reply to them anymore. It's a promise to myself. I've got this. I've got my life. I finally, truly got it. If you've ever had to earn your own peace by walking away from a situation that was breaking you, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments how you finally knew it was time to let go.